Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to Base Day F. You know me, I'm sociologist Ashley Frawley. This week, I spoke with the amazing and courageous Roger Foley. Roger has several complex medical conditions, including cerebellar ataxia, which is an incurable degenerative neurological disorder that means he requires assistance to live in the community. His case made headlines when he went public with a recording of hospital staff offering him a choice between paying over $1,000 a day for continued hospital care, forced discharge to inadequate care that would almost certainly foreshorten his life, or medical assistance in dying. This was a really difficult episode for me to create, and I will warn you that this might be disturbing to some, but you should listen and you should be disturbed. But I hope that by the end, you'll feel uplifted by Roger's rallying cry against pessimism and for making life worth living until the very end.
My name is Roger Foley. I'm a 49-year-old person with disabilities currently in the hospital. Been in the hospital 8.5 years trying to get the home care that I need to live. I've been under a lot of pressure. There's been forced discharges, financial pressures, a lot of threats, including being presented with and pressured to accept euthanasia because they feel that my life isn't worth anything and that I should just be gone instead of burden the system in their minds. Um, I'm fighting for my life, but at the same time, I realize that others are in the same situation I'm in, and some are in worse situations. There's also a lot of casualties. So I realize that I have a responsibility to come forward with information, knowledge that I know of, but also come forward with facts and evidence about the overall Canadian regime, as they call it. The Attorney General of Canada, David Lametti, called the euthanasia and assisted suicide system in Canada a regime. He called it the MAID regime. So I think it's fair that I call it a MAID regime as well, because it's what the government refers to. But there's a lot of evidence and fact out that the public is not aware of. And if they were aware of more of the evidence of the how and why this happened, the misfeasance and misconduct that put this forward that is causing the horrors to persons with disabilities and vulnerable persons, then I think a lot of people would agree that the human race is not mature enough to have euthanasia and assisted suicide, and we should improve palliative care, improve health care, improve our respect for each other as human beings, no matter what abilities or what health differences we have. So, um,
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I understand that you are in hospital. I'm doubly appreciative that you've taken the time to meet with me. Can you take me back to when you very first became interested in the euthanasia issue? What happened?
it wasn't really even on the map. I didn't even know what the definition of euthanasia was. I knew there was some kind of physician assisted suicide. But in November 2016, I was being starved in the hospital. There was very little access to food to me. That's one of their tactics. They put patients under such duress to agree to terms that they want under duress. The healthcare environment is very lawless, and they inflict a lot of harm upon the vulnerable to try to coerce us into the outcomes that they want. So I was being blocked from the direct funding home care I needed. I was having sporadic access to food. I was being berated by staff and managers. And in one day, where I was being blocked completely from access to food, I was advocating for it, all the way up to uh, the floor coordinator. And I just told her, when you do things like this to me, like when you starve me and you berate me, it just makes me more suicidal. Um, because my situation is, there's no escape from it. And she just wrote out, well, if you feel that way, the hospital has a program that can help you with that.
Oh my
And
God.
I was just, yeah, I was just so shocked. And I just like stared off to the side of my hospital bed to the floor, shocked. And I was thinking, like, what the heck? Like, and then I looked right back at her and I said, do you realize what you're saying to me? And she just stared at me with a blank face and kind of a half smile, tilted her head, and just was like, yeah, you're not getting food right now. And she walked out. And so, like, that just triggered me and flipped a switch, and I applied for it. So I know firsthand how people feel when you're just chucked at them. And there's the case of Alan Nichols, who was a man in British Columbia at the Chilliwack Hospital, and he actually received an assisted death there. His family's very devastated, and on his MAID form was hearing loss, and he was
Mm.
in a mental health ward. So was I when that was tossed at me. I was in LHSC, London Health Sciences Centre, Victoria Hospital, mental health. So was he. So when his situation came out on the news, that resonated with me and impacted me deeply, because for me, I came to the realization later on in I'm being taught into something horrible, and I came to my senses. Um, but for Alan Nichols, that didn't happen, and they euthanized him.
Oh my God.
So that was the first time I ever really became familiar with regime, and it was a way where the regime came to my face and actively started to coerce and approach me. Um, and then after I canceled the assessment appointment, um, that apparently ticked the hospital off, where the directors and managers then came up with this forced discharge to come into my room, threaten me by saying, um, you got three options. Either we're sending you back to the home care you had that caused you damages and injuries and hospitalizations at less hours than you need. So it wasn't enough hours to even provide for me. I wouldn't live very long under that, regardless. Two was, or you stay in the hospital and we charge you north of $1,500 a day, or we just came by to see if you were interested in assisted dying. So, like, I was just shocked again. I was devastated, and of course, I'm in mental health for a reason, because I was very suicidal because of the home care I received in a situation where I was trapped. So they almost talked me into it again, and again, like came to my senses, and I just like I'm gonna continue fighting for the home care I need. Um, and and then like it happened another two times out of nowhere. Like I'm in my room. I think it was sometime. this was like a year after first attempt, November 2017. Um, uh, could have been October. I have to check the date, but they kept my room and they tell me, "Oh, you got an appointment scheduled, and they're gonna help me get there." And I'm like, "What? What appointment is this?" And they're like, "Oh, the appointment with this doctor." And I'm like, "Wait a second, that's the appointment that was set for the euthanasia assessment." I'm like, I canceled that. I verbally said that I do not want it. And they're like, "Oh, well, we'll see if we can cancel it." And like kept on asking, and nobody was canceling it.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
really advocated hard. And then um, I actually phoned the doctor's office the next day and say, "I've been trying to cancel this. Could you please cancel it?" And they're like, "Okay." Someone called us like late the day before, and we canceled it. So no one even told me that they canceled it after I was advocating for it to be canceled. But the fact that they kept that active, uh, and then in January 2018, I have the flu. I'm on IV. I'm very weak, and I'm in my bed, and get a knock at the door, and it's one of the nurses that was assigned to me doing a safety check to see if I had thoughts of suicide and self harm. And I'm very honest, and because I'm very honest with healthcare providers because they're supposed to help you. And you, as a patient, should feel comfortable opening up to them because uh, they're treating you. And so I tell him, yeah, I have thoughts of ending my life, and because of the situation I'm in, like, and then he whips out, "Oh, well, if you don't get self-directed funding, you can just apply for an assisted." You know what I mean?
You would think the most, like, humane thing, if someone is suicidal, you don't say, "Oh, well, we can help you with that." You say, "No,
I know.
your life has value, your life has meaning." And then you go, "Yeah, you're right. It was just a dark No, no." And what worries me too is I've seen so many times that they try to do it very quickly, and there are even, reports of doctors who say, "Oh, we have to do this quickly before they change their minds."
Exactly. Yes. And like there's this book, the Canadian Association of MAID Assessors and Providers put out their manual, and it says like there's no law against bringing up MAID to a vulnerable patient. And it's like uh, we have laws to prevent like sexual harassment in our country, but we
Mhm.
don't have laws to prevent harassment upon the disabled to commit suicide through euthanasia and assisted suicide. Like it's
You wouldn't believe it, right? Like, it sounds so awful. Years ago, when I was, I'd lecture on sociology of mental health and so on. I would often bring up the example that Indigenous women were being sterilized in Canada up until 2017. And I thought, that's really interesting. There's some research that I wanted to do there because I was, you don't go like that kind of awful thing often happens through the guise of kindness, like, "Oh, well, don't you know, aren't you a bit poor, and don't you have too many kids already, so don't you think it's the best thing to do?" Like, that really it's best if Indigenous women who happen to be very, very poor just don't reproduce. That's what I was thinking. But actually, it was so much worse than I thought. Like, the situation for Indigenous people was so much worse than I thought because some people had the wherewithal to record the conversations and to record the treatment that they were receiving.
Joyce Echaquan put up this live video from her hospital bed yesterday. The mother of 7 calls out for help. The distress in her voice is obvious. You can hear other voices, too. Hospital staff insulting her.
Joyce had spoken in her native language on the live stream, saying that she was worried she had been given too much morphine, something that she was allergic to that was on her medical records not to give her. As she continued to call out and ask for help, the staff simply ignored her calls, and when they didn't show her any attention, she would scream louder for help. And then when they finally did, they were talking down to her as if she didn't matter, as if she didn't deserve help. And one of Joyce's cousins had told her that one of the nurses was actually saying that she was stupid, only good for sex, and a drain to the health system, and that the employees were paying for it. The last thing that she heard was that the staff were saying Joyce was better off dead.
And first of all, I think this is still true, that a lot of evil happens under the guise of kindliness, that people think, well, it's really, this is for the best. But I had no idea that it also operates in such an evil way. But you also had the wherewithal to record some of your conversations with people who were trying to encourage you, or I don't know exactly the right wording, but can you tell me a little bit more about when you decided to record some of those conversations?
I decided to record in about mid 2017. It was when I started coming to my senses. Like, they had me totally brainwashed with this dying with dignity stuff. And there's so much propaganda that the Canadian government and its partners puts out on the internet, and like even social media. Our justice minister puts out promotional tweets about MAID. I can actually email you them. Um, they're also archived on the web, but making little bit videos like MAID is like safe, and safeguards, and um like there's so much propaganda out there. And the first time I was approached with it, like, I fell for it. um so when I started coming to my senses with the abuse they were projecting on me, um in like the starving me on occasion, berating me, the psychological coercion, and on top of that, the flat out coercion towards MAID. And I just decided, okay, I need to start recording, because things are happening here that are just egregious. I don't have any friends or family that can visit me in the hospital. I'm all alone. I'm sitting duck, and so I knew it was best if I had my own witness, which was an audio recorder. And on top of that, Canada is a one-party consent country. So is Ontario. So in the criminal code, you're allowed to record a conversation you're having with anybody that you're a party to, and you don't have to make anyone aware. So I knew too I was within my rights. And more people in Canada, especially vulnerable and disabled, should be doing that to protect themselves from the horrible things that happen in this country to us. And on top of that, there was a CTV W5 show on home care horror stories. And there was an interview with an Ontario detective, and he was talking about the amount of abuse that he's investigated in home care is horrifying. And he said one of the ways to protect is to record the visits. So that also seeing that interview with him also opened my eyes to saying, okay, I better start recording, because one party consent, and here I'm seeing a police detective telling vulnerable people and their families to record.
So what happened in that particular recording?
Which recording?
Oh, though I didn't realize there was more than one. So there was one
Oh,
recording that I feel like went
oh
around the
yeah.
whole world.
Like if I had self-directed funding, then I'd be fine. But
if you weren't, you can just apply to get assisted if you want it in your life. Like, you know, I mean, you don't have to do it in some dramatic manner. You can apply for assisted, you know.
What's the plan that you know of?
Roger, this is not my show. I told you my piece of this was to talk to you about if you had interest in assisted dying.
Like, I still do, and like so I released in the public interest 2 of the 4. I didn't get the first one recorded, so it was after the first attempt. But 2, 3, and 4 I did, and I released some of them to the media in 2018 because it was in public interest, and CTV had interest in my situation, and I'm very honest. And my lawyer at the time also told me that it would be in the public interest to release some recordings, so I did. And
What
yeah,
happened after some of those recordings went out?
it was on the CTV national news. It's still up there. Like, if you Google my name, the CTV national news article, I think I forget what the title was, but if you click on that, it shows their broadcast, and then it also has the extended audio recordings in other options and stuff. And
What was the
um,
reaction like?
well, I'm in the hospital, so I really can't tell
Mm.
what's going on in the public, but from online, uh, it raised a lot of awareness to the dangers and horrors of what's happening with the regime. And that was back before the expansion. That was the first piece of legislation, Bill C-14, where your death had to be reasonably foreseeable. And
Oh, wow.
just yeah, there's not a lot of awareness about it, but the whole reasonably foreseeable definition didn't really have a definition. Even the physicians that are pro euthanasia uh, are the first to say that when C-14 came out with reasonably foreseeable, new doctor knew what reasonably foreseeable was. And the term went from uh, 3 months before death to 6 months before death to a year before death to 3 years before death to 10 years before death. And then it was expanded to a 28-year-old with stable disabilities. She had multiple system atrophy. Her name was Julia Lamb. And the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association and Julia Lamb sued the government shortly after C-14 was passed, saying it didn't go far enough.
Yeah.
So a doctor said this 28-year-old qualified for MAID under reasonably foreseeable because if she ever decided to stop using her ventilator, she might develop a chest infection, and therefore, because of these what if scenarios, we label her 100% reasonably foreseeable. So, also for me, when I was in the hospital in 2017, an article came out in the Ottawa Citizen about a woman with cerebellar ataxia who was deemed reasonably foreseeable, and she had euthanasia. I have cerebellar ataxia. My genetic type is spinocerebellar ataxia type 14. So in 2017, cerebellar ataxia, everyone's cerebellar ataxia had a target on their back because the press put out that it was reasonably foreseeable.
When you say a target on their back, what do you mean by that?
Well, when the press and the propaganda machine advertises persons with disease A or disease B are reasonably foreseeable, and we have people with this that qualify for euthanasia that we're giving euthanasia. All of a sudden, society, their automatic trigger in their head is, well, oh, that's so horrible that they need euthanasia. So, like when the Truchon decision was being litigated and decided to expand the euthanasia regime even more. One of the litigants with Truchon was Nicole Gladue, and she had post polio syndrome. Well, there was a public community call conference at one of the disabled organizations had, and one of the women on the call had post polio syndrome, and she was saying, this is so horrible because now I go to the hospital and I have post polio, and all over the media, post polio was used to expand euthanasia in Canada through the courts. And it just opens up a target where people look at you and they feel obligated to offer you euthanasia because they don't think that your life is worth anything, and they think that the disease is so horrible for you that you're beyond help. So that's what I mean by putting a target on the back, like advertising cerebellar ataxia is reasonably foreseeable. Well, thanks a lot. Now everyone look at me because I'm reasonably foreseeable.
Do you think that the availability of euthanasia affects your ability to get the you plural, people like you, people with diseases that are reasonably foreseeable or conditions? Do you think that affects the quality of the care that you receive or the availability of community care and things like that?
100%. What euthanasia and assisted suicide regimes do, it takes away the incentive for not only the government and its systems, but the overall healthcare industry and the population. It takes away the incentive to improve healthcare and sports to live, and it completely obliterates suicide prevention because it's mixed messaging all now. It's like in Canada, they made this 988 hotline that you call. I called it once to try to see if it was actually appropriate help. It's not. Like it's like a chop shop hotline that you just call, and they uh, they don't really they don't really address anything. Like you talk with them and they don't want to talk about your issues. They're trying to talk about other things to take your mind off things, but they're not addressing. And but then they have this other um, hotline with an option that you can press and apply to MAID, and then the process happens very quickly. So
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to
it,
laugh. It's awful, but it's kind of funny. I made a
yeah.
joke about this and nobody laughed, but it was like, "Oh, Canada's going to have a new suicide hotline." Presumably, it'd be like, "For us to provide the suicide, press 1. To talk to someone for 5
Yeah,
minutes, press 2."
it is that exactly, and you're right. It's not funny, but we human beings, when we're shocked, we just laugh at the ludicrousy of it, like the horror, the shock. So it's okay to chuckle because it's a chuckle out of shock, and everyone does it. It's a reaction. So, but you're right. It's here in Ontario. I think it's press 5. So it's ridiculous.
I mean, I have to
Like,
say too, like once the it just from my own experience as well with this, once that option is available, you demanding, no, my life has value and I want to decide what I'm going to do with it, is like you're making crazy demands on a system that can't afford you. And this is what happened with my family member who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, by the way, after the hospital knew he had stage 3 cancer and didn't tell him, dragged their feet for months, and then finally they're like, oh, it's now stage 4. There's nothing we can do. They're just absolutely no. So then when we were like advocating for him, because there actually was a treatment available, very expensive treatment, they were like, you know, how dare you try to eke out more years of your life, that you're just gonna um you're just gonna die anyway, just accept the inevitable. That was the line, because it was like they're losing their hubris, that powerful progressive human desire to live a little longer, to make life more worth living, to want to hold on to it for as long as possible. And they started making judgments about the value of my family member's life. And thank God he has 2 family members who were highly educated who were like, no, this is not on. And I did a full on literature review. I reviewed the literature and I wrote up a paper. And like that's how we advocated. And my family member is now cancer free, I should say. Um,
oh,
yeah, it's
oh,
crazy.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, but anybody else, particularly because this person's Indigenous, there aren't a lot of Indigenous people with PhDs and so on, that are going to do that, right? Like you just think, oh,
Yeah.
well, the doctor knows best. I guess that's just it then. So sad for me. And just did what they said, but we knew better. But how many people know better? That's the thing that kills me, because not everybody has the wherewithal to come to their senses like you did, and to advocate for yourself. But why do you think it's so hard for people to see that your life has value and meaning to you?
It's the people around us, when you're surrounded by people who treat you very poor, who berate you, and you're in a system where your needs are not being met and you're in oppression, it's hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel. And it's hard to see uh, the value that you have. You give up on yourself. And um, you're right. uh, In terms of cancer, uh, people at stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3, they're not getting the treatment they need, and they progress, and then all of a sudden they get to stage 4, and then they opt for MAID. Like a doctor in BC was on the CBC show called White Coat Black Coat, and he was
White coat,
saying,
black art. Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he was saying that euthanasia in Canada is easier to get than MRI imaging for someone who has symptoms of brain cancer. And there are also reports of persons that couldn't get early cancer treatment, where their cancer became uh, terminal, where all of a sudden they had to get MAID. It's wrong, and it just shows the lack of incentive. Where you would think that we would have an incentive to improve cancer care in our country, but we don't. But we actually have the opposite incentive to expand euthanasia. So uh, that's what happens. It obliterates incentive to improve healthcare, and then obliterates the suicide prevention. So
Prior to our conversation, you sent me extensive documentation detailing and evidencing a lot of your criticisms of Canada's MAID regime, as you call it. And it covers things like socioeconomic inequalities and even judicial and governmental misconduct and bias that you think exists. But I was curious. Let's start with the socioeconomic implications. So, what's going on in terms of where people? We talked about disability and the difficulty it is receiving proper care and attention that leads to this kind of depression, which is welcomed with open arms apparently by medical professionals a lot of the time, and the risk is there that that could become more common. But where are people in terms of their decisions and their socioeconomic context, you know their
Oh,
poverty?
oh, recently, I don't know if you've seen it, but the Ontario coroner released a report in Ontario. The Associated Press, I think the reporter's name is Maria Chang. She released an article highlighting the report. It's also gone viral, where the reports are everywhere now. But the coroner was showing that in track two MAID, which is the non-recently foreseeable, which really there's such a blurred line between the two of them, because track one with the reasonable doesn't mean anything anyway, and persons track hop all the time. But anyway, those who received euthanasia, their track two have been found to have very poor socioeconomic status and poor access to services. They brought up the case of patient A and patient B. I think patient B was a man with irritable bowel syndrome that was very severe, and he applied for MAID and he got it. And he didn't have the supports he needed. Patient A was a woman who um, had disabilities and needed housing, and she couldn't get it, and she received MAID. Uh, with track one, the same thing exists, but there's less focus on it now because of that blur between track one and track two, where people now are focusing on the horrors of track one while forgetting about the horrors of track. I mean, they're focusing on the horrors of track two and forgetting about the horrors of track one. Um, but they're one and the same. For instance, the hospital I'm in, LHSC, under the old regime, C14, before the expansion, they released a report. I send it to. It's a socioeconomic study and how patients in the hospital uh, that are of low socioeconomic status are applying for MAID in greater amounts than those of high socioeconomic status. And the amounts that receive MAID from both groups are even. So, it's really concerning. But then there's junk science that's released by these pro euthanasia fanatics. One of them is James Downer. He actually allows Dying with Dignity to keep up his recruitment speeches that he made for them on YouTube. You just have to Google James Downer Dying with Dignity, and that will come up. In my opinion, he has no objectivity, and he shouldn't be making studies, and he should be disclosing all his conflicts, which he does not. But his report, he deemed that uh, track one MAID only those of high economic status in the community receive MAID. But if you look at his footnotes, his socioeconomic status that he used was 2006 Canada Census and 2009 socioeconomic data, when comparing it to the MAID numbers in 2019. So it's like they always release these junk science papers to justify that everything's okay, don't worry about it. And what it's really not. So um, it's always been happening where low socioeconomic status has been applying for MAID in great numbers. And just because an area is high socioeconomic status in like a survey, it does not mean that there's not low socioeconomic status persons living in that area.
Yeah.
So the hospital is a good indicator of what's happening. Their study about low socioeconomic status and MAID is more reliable than Downers could ever be, and so is the Ontario Coroners, because people from these high socioeconomic areas that are actually low socioeconomic individuals are coming to the hospital to receive MAID
Right.
because they don't have any community supports either way. So,
I always
um,
used to say that people who are better off choose assisted dying. Choose. I'm very. I have decided I'm always just going to call it euthanasia because there's a whole thing about the language that's been captured. But anyway, people. People who are better off choose euthanasia because they're used to having choices. For them, it's just one of many choices. I could do this or I could do that. But people in lower socioeconomic status, they choose it because they have no other choices. And that's a very big difference, right? So when people sort of go on about autonomy, yeah, because they're so used to having autonomy and they don't really understand what it's like to be somebody with nowhere else to go and no choices and having to make that choice.
correct. And there's also a factor of suicidal ideation when you're
Mhm.
oppressed and you don't have the support you need, and due to the situation you're in, 10 times more pain and suffering than you would be if you had supports, you become suicidal. There's nothing to live for because you're not getting the support you need to live. And so that pushes people over the edge too. And with high socioeconomic status persons, I'll give an example. Nicole Gladue, uh, who was the litigant along with Jean Truchon in the Truchon decision, who was saying, "Oh, after the trial, she like broke down in tears in a press conference, and she's like, "Oh, I have this option, and it's great." And but she actually didn't die from euthanasia. She died of natural causes from post polio. She died a natural death, and you see this with others like Gloria Taylor in the Carter decision. She died of natural causes. Is- Day one Carter, the Justice Lynn Smith said you can have a euthanasia death, Gloria Taylor, um, but she ended up unfortunately getting pneumonia and passing on naturally. And that just shows that euthanasia is not required to have like a death. And
It's so amazing you have to say
I
that.
know
Yeah.
we have this thing palliative care, and in our country palliative care is of low quality. We need to improve that, but we've lost incentive. But you don't need a euthanasia assisted suicide regime if you strengthen and never stop the incentive to improve palliative care. Like Justice Beverly McLaughlin, she confessed in her book that her husband Rory in the 80s, when he got cancer, he became very suicidal and he wanted to assist suicide. And and that is what made her like obsessive about getting euthanasia legalized in Canada. But even in her own book, she admits Rory died a very peaceful death with palliative care. And Rory was around like for a a vast amount of time after he initially like was begging for it, he was in palliative care, and Beverly McLaughlin got to spend time with her husband, and Brian Mulroney called her and offered her a promotion to the BC Court of Appeal, and she originally wasn't going to take it, but she talked to Rory about it, and Rory said, "Listen, take it." So Beverly McLaughlin also owes her whole judicial career to the fact that euthanasia and assisted suicide did not exist in the 80s. She had more time with her loved one, and Rory died peacefully. Like that's what's missed here. Like there's always the fear card put out by the euthanasia fanatics, the pro euthanasia fanatics. They're always like horrible death, pain and suffering, this and that. They're never like, okay, what can we do to improve palliative care because it can be done correctly. And then I'm not sure if you saw the interview, it was on Jordan Peterson with Kathy Sharon, but she was bringing up Dr. Joel Zippett's research work where these euthanasia drugs actually they use a paralytic, so you can't tell how painful the euthanasia drugs are on the patient. And in autopsies of patients in the States, prisoners that have had these these drugs for capital punishment, their lungs were filled with fluid. So receiving the euthanasia drugs is akin to being waterboarded. It's drowning in their own body. But the person has a paralytic, so it looks peaceful. But it's not the painful death that these pro euthanasia fanatics say it is.
There's I interviewed another woman actually as part of some research that I'm doing, and she a lot of what you're saying was really reflected in what she was saying, that she says she basically watched her mother murdered in front of her because her sister had advocated for euthanasia for her mother so that they could time her death before the summer holidays. I mean, it's so awful and so brutal that you have to laugh.
It is.
But so there's there's the element of like it sanitizes death. Because death is unpredictable. Like if you're close to the end of life, it's like waiting for a birth. You don't know, it could happen at any time, right? And you're like, when's this going to happen, kind of thing. Or like insurance companies as well, like their biggest cost is the fact that death is unpredictable, and this offers a kind of predictable, allegedly sanitized death that you can schedule and sort it around the kids' holidays and so on. And she was very upset by this because she wanted those last few months with her mother. She wanted that time with her. And people say, oh, what's a few months? Well, what's a few months when there's so much left to say? And it was very short notice. It was all so quick. She had to go in there, and they all had to, like, there was like this party atmosphere, and everybody had to pretend that it was okay because they didn't want to make it bad for the mother. But the thing is that the mother had had an opiate addiction, and the drugs didn't work, and they had to climb. Oh, it's so awful. It is so brutal that I can only really write it in the report because it's too terrible to even say what happened. But she watched this happen. It didn't work. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. It wasn't this promised sanitized death. And I think what you're saying there, and now I can well imagine people saying like, "Oh, now you're playing the fear card." But the thing is that most people are afraid of death, right? It's the unknown, and people are afraid of becoming disabled as well. And so it's like, I just saw a video, like a reel recently of a woman with like, who lost her limbs because of cancer. And people were saying, oh, wow, why don't they just put her out of her misery? Do you know what I mean? Like people could not, they just imagined that is the worst possible thing to happen to me. So you have all of those people are voting on the lives of everybody else. But for the people who are afraid of becoming disabled, what would you tell them? They think that being disabled is the worst thing that could possibly happen to them. So they think, well, if that ever happened to me, just euthanize me, kind of thing. What would you say to that kind of outlook?
I would say to them that You can't expect to be the same person you are now forever. You're gonna change. You're gonna get older. Injuries are gonna happen. Joints, the cartilage is gonna wear away. Your skin is gonna age. And you're gonna get disabilities. Your health is gonna fail. You're gonna get challenges. And when they come, uh, you need to find out how to live with them and still achieve your goals in life. Like when you become disabled, um, it takes a while to adjust, to figure out what's happening and what's going on. And it does take an emotional adjustment too, to realize that you're not the person that you were, and you're not going to be that person you were. And we as human beings have to accept that, because if we don't, we're just going to give up at the first difficulties we come across. Like if s- someone ages so much that they feel that their face is too wrinkled, so now they don't want to go outside at all or anything. That's not a way to do it. You're aging, age gracefully, like it happens. Uh, and I think that with euthanasia and assisted suicide introduced, it gives a signal. Oh, it's okay to give up and not face things head on and not accept. For instance, me, like I went from being, um, I was born with cerebellar ataxia. I didn't know quite what I had until it completely started to deteriorate in my 30s. But it was difficult at first to accept. Okay, I have to use a cane now. Okay, people, they want to understand every word I say because I'm losing the ability to speak because I can't coordinate my tongue fully. Okay, now I have to use a walker. Now I'm in a wheelchair. But every stage I went by, I realized my life still has value. I'm still a human being. Um, and I can still achieve the goals and dreams and passions I have, just in an alternate way. Like you have to adjust. And persons, like you look at Christopher Reeve when he had the spinal cord injury and he was paralyzed. Uh, Look at the things he did with his family, with his foundation. You look at Michael J. Fox when his Parkinson's started to take effect. He carried on. He accepted. He's living a wonderful life. He's doing lots of things. He has a foundation. He's trying to find treatments and cures to help people. But when you and Terry Fox in Canada, um, and all these individuals, like it's more difficult for individuals to accept disability and thrive with their disabilities with euthanasia and assisted suicide, because now it's a signal to give up, to not accept it. And when you have a disability, you learn to live with it. And others that don't have disabilities look at it and say, "Oh, how can you live with this?" Because they don't realize yet. But when they're there, and everyone gets there, everyone ages, there's injuries, everyone's body will slowly fail. But when you're there, you realize that uh, it's bad and it's unfortunate, but I'm I'm still a person and I have a life to live, and it's not gonna be like I was when I was healthier. It's gonna be different, but it's still gonna be good. And I think that's what's best. Like I'm in the hospital bed, I'm severely disabled with neurodegenerative disease that has no cure. I need help every day to be hoisted into a sling in a certain position to be able to swallow. I can only have pureed food. I eat the same thing every day. Uh, People ask me, how can you eat that every day? I'm like, it's just fuel. Like, it's fuel to keep me alive, and I have passions and goals. Like, I have a goal to finally get the home care that I need to live in the community, to get that self-directed funding home care. And then when I'm in the community, I still want to volunteer for uh, organizations that support persons with disabilities and other philanthropy. I still want to be able to sing and do another album. I used to sing. I'd like to
Mhm.
sing again. I have many songs I've written. I have like books I'd like to write. Like I still want to be a part of the community. I'm highly disabled, but I'll still find a way. Like life isn't over just because you're in a wheelchair or you're in a hospital bed. And I think that's one thing that people have to realize, that once you become disabled, your life still has a value and there's still happiness there. So
That's such a I'm tearing up. That's such such a beautiful way to put it, and I'm tempted to end it there because that was a fantastic sort of, uh, like, rallying cry for the meaning and value of life. But I have so much more that I wanna ask you. So, maybe what we can do is we'll do another episode, and we'll go
sure.
into more. But is there anything else that you really that I didn't ask? I mean, I didn't ask a lot. I didn't go through like even a few of the questions that I actually wrote down. But is there anything that you would really like to leave people with? You know, there are countries that are considering this. You know, I'm in Greece actually, but I was in the UK for 10 years and I'm still very active in advocating against euthanasia there. Is there anything that you would tell people who are on the fence? What would you leave them with?
Well, persons in UK right now facing this issue up close, I would say to them that once you legalize this, you're going to have absolutely no control whatsoever over it. Horrors are going to happen that the country, the world won't even know of, because that evidence will be silenced. There'll be heavy propaganda. It will slide uncontrollably, probably just as fast as Canada did. Um, you need to focus on improving the NHS. You
Mm.
need to improve palliative care. You need to improve the personal health budget system, aka the direct payments for home care. Is going to destroy also the incentive to improve um, healthcare. It's going to desensitize the UK to where, like you said in your comment, where life has become blasé, where some lives don't have values where others are. Like that's what's going to happen. So right now in the UK, I'm very concerned and quite frightened for persons with disabilities and vulnerable persons there, and I'm hoping that they do not legalize it. So,
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll come back and I'll have you back and we'll talk about again because I another thing that I want to talk about is like what is underlying the push because in my research I've uncovered some really disturbing stuff, and I kind of wanted to know what you
yeah.
thought about it as well. So we'll have you back again. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Ashley.